So welcome to this month's Acting for Justice event. My name is Leila Oakley, and I am a member of the staff here at Just Faith Ministries, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Jack Jezreel, and we're just delighted that you could join us for this evening's webinar. And we want to begin tonight's program like we do every Acting for Justice event with prayer. And this prayer, I want to mention before we start, comes from the Want to Talk program, which is our program on nonviolent communication and civil dialogue. And this prayer specifically comes from session 8. So if you will, wherever you find yourself, join me in prayer, taking a moment for a deep breath and pray with me. A reading from Psalm 121, 1 through 2. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Holy God, we pause to center ourselves in your presence as the sands shift around us and cultures clash. And as each side dehumanizes the other, we stand firmly on the rock of your salvation. As we breathe in, we notice stillness that surrounds us. As we breathe out, we release our anxiety unto you.
God of grace, we pause to celebrate our interconnectedness with one another, with those who share our thirst for justice, and with those who think very differently than we do. Regardless of political parties, regardless of our theological convictions, and regardless of our differing priorities, we honor the ties that bind us together as one family. As we breathe in, we receive God's unconditional love. As we breathe out, we pour out God's love onto others.
Creator of all things, we pause to celebrate our interconnectedness with the earth. An oak tree captures carbon dioxide from the air and releases it as oxygen when we breathe. Wild berries provide joy and sustenance for humans and other animals who return their gift by dispersing their seeds. A handful of soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on the face of our planet. Tiny beings that sustain human life. As we breathe in, we honor our oneness with creation. As we breathe out, we release our loneliness and isolation.
God of compassion, cleanse us of the poisonous anger and self-righteousness that eats away at our own souls, our relationships, and the justice work we seek to accomplish. We lay down our resentments and commit to seeking justice through nonviolent words and actions. As we breathe in, we inhale compassion. As we breathe out, we release our bitterness.
God of hope, we give to you the cynicism that paralyzes us from action. Help us hold on to your promise that every valley shall be lifted up and every hill made low. We open our hands to receive a new understanding of our own calling and vocation, and we ask for your guidance as we seek justice and healing in our divided world. As we breathe in, we are filled with hope. As we breathe out, we release our cynicism.
Loving God, as we continue throughout our time together, we ask that you continue to be present with us, filling us with hope, surrounding us with love, and restoring us with your peace. Amen.
Amen. Again, good evening. I'm Leila Oakley, a member of the Just Faith Ministry staff, and I'm glad to be here gathered with you all this evening. I wanted to share just a few pieces of logistics before we jump into the presentation. Tonight's presentation is being recorded, and we'll make that recording available to you on Monday in a follow-up email. So keep an eye out. On Monday, feel free to share the recording with anyone who couldn't be here but might want to hear tonight's message. Right after the presentation, there will be a time for a Q&A. So if you have a question for our presenter this evening, feel free to send that to Jack at any point via the chat. You'll find the chat on your toolbar. It's that icon down below where you can type a message. And again, that will be just following the presentation. After the Q&A, for those who want to hang around and have some small group conversation, there'll be an opportunity to go into a breakout room with other folks on the call and share some reflections and conversation around the topic of the presentation this evening. So if you'd like to hang around, we invite you to stay, connect, and have some conversation with those on the call. Again, good to be here with you, and I'll turn it back to Jack.
Thanks, Leela. And again, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure now to introduce, or I probably should say, reintroduce you to a familiar face. Cory Lockhart is a teacher, artist, public speaker, and owner of Heart Communication. She facilitates classes, workshops, and conversations using the nonviolent communication framework. She wrote the Just Faith program entitled Cultivating Nonviolence, Harvesting Peace, and was a consultant for our Want to Talk program. She's keenly interested in co-creating a world with less shame, less blame, and less harm, and more justice, peace, and love. Cory, it's good to have you with us again.
Thank you, Jack. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you all for showing up this evening, and thank you to Just Faith for inviting me to be here. So tonight's topic, I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. I know that when I am learning, it helps me to see words, and especially if it's things that are maybe new or things that are percolating in my brain. And so tonight's presentation is called Tools for Survival This Election Season. As Jack said, I use a nonviolent compassionate communication framework. I've actually done a presentation for Just Faith on that. It's on YouTube if you want to see it. And so tonight there will be a little overlap with that one if you were present for that. And I also know that when we are learning new things, or when we are renewing our learning, it helps to hear things more than once. So if you're hearing things maybe for a second or a third time, I hope that it serves you. And if you're hearing things for the first time, I hope that it serves you. And I want to start with two quotes. And before I do that, I just want to name the dominant cultural framework that we're living in. So the dominant cultural framework that we are living and breathing every day very often takes us to, and these words have already been introduced because it's the world that I don't want to live in: shame, blame, judgment, criticism, and reward and punishment. And I didn't used to say reward and punishment, but I think both of those can get us into trouble, because very often we think of them in punitive or retributive ways when we're thinking about punishment. And when we're thinking about reward, we get into all sorts of craziness about who deserves what and if we deserve. And I think very often those things can get us into trouble. And so that is our dominant cultural framework. And I want to offer these two quotes to reorient us. And the first one is from St. Francis. Can true humility and compassion exist in our words and eyes unless we know we too are capable of any act? And this for me is a reminder that if I had been born in a different place, in a different family, with different values and a different culture, I might be doing things that in my current body and family and place and culture, I find highly objectionable. But it is only by the grace of my birth that I'm here doing a thing on nonviolent communication. And it helps me just to remember and to offer grace, and also to offer grace to myself when I don't act quite the way that I want to. And the other quote that I always use is from Rumi: out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And again, for me, this takes us out of that dominant cultural framework of shame, blame, judgment, criticism, reward, and punishment, and reminds me that there is another framework possible. And that possible framework is that meeting in the field, where instead of deciding what's wrong and what's right, who's wrong and who's right, who's good and who's bad, what's good and what's bad, I can come into that place where what I am seeking instead is connection. And in this practice, and with the practices that I'll be sharing tonight and the words, the primary goal is connection. And with compassionate or nonviolent communication, or NVC, the primary connection is with ourselves. It's the one that we have the most agency in. I cannot control what any other person does. And really, I only have so much control over what I do because of sometimes biology takes over, but I am the one that has the most agency over what I do. And so the primary connection, the one that I can cultivate is first, and want to cultivate first, is the one with myself. Because when I am connected, when I am clear within myself, I can more easily connect with other people without losing ourselves. Some of us are so skilled at connecting with other people, and that is a beautiful thing. And in no way do I want to say that that's not a beautiful thing. And sometimes what happens is we're so connected to another person that we do that, we're connected to the detriment of being connected with ourselves. When we feel connected to ourselves, to other people, compassion and empathy naturally flow. Because if I feel connected to Tom, I'm going to want Tom to be well, because I know that his wellness, that well-being, is going to ripple out to other people. And if I feel connected to Jack, I know that his well-being ripples out to other people, including me, just the same way that when people aren't well, we feel that too. We feel the connection. This is why things that happen all the way across the world affect us. And so in this practice, the primary goal is connection. Our primary tool is curiosity, or a sense of wonder. And I like to talk about curiosity as being open-mindedness, and wonder being open-heartedness. And I always or often use this particular graphic because it reminds me that depending on where we are standing, whether figuratively or literally, we may see things very, very differently. And so if I were above that shape, I might argue till I'm blue in the face that there is a red circle. And if someone else is looking at this shape from another angle, they might say, you're crazy. What are you talking about? That's a green triangle. And somebody else might say, oh my gosh, I don't even know what you're thinking. That is a red square. And so we could get into an argument about whether it's a blue circle or a green triangle or a red square, or we could imagine that we don't have the full picture. I like to say there's a big T truth, and that big T truth, I believe the only one who knows that is God. And then we each have a little T truth, and our little T truths contribute to our understanding and awareness of the big T truth, but none of us has the full picture. So this is a reminder that really there is an opportunity to learn from other people if we come with that open-mindedness and that open-heartedness. And what we're talking about are practices. These are opportunities to experiment. As we were chatting at the beginning, before you all got on, we were talking about the program Want to Talk, and whether someone had integrated the practices or just had better learning. And what I said is, it is a practice. We've been talking for many, many decades. And so to change those communication patterns is going to take some time. And so hopefully we can offer ourselves some grace. And just like we would with any other practice, we know if it doesn't go the way that we want it to, we can come back to it. We can try again. With an experiment, we can make a hypothesis. We may see that our hypothesis was right or wrong, and then we can adjust how we're experimenting. So the first thing I want to talk about is, so we have opportunities, sometimes demands of us, made to engage with conversations, difficult conversations. It can happen in person. Sometimes it happens on social media. And there are some questions that I invite us to ask ourselves. We are asking ourselves these questions unconsciously very often, but not necessarily consciously. And so I want to bring to consciousness some questions to engage with. And the first one is this: is it worth my time and energy to engage in this conversation? And there are three possible answers. The first one is no. This is not worth my time and energy. I will not engage. The second possible answer is yes, this is worth my time and energy. I am all in. Let's do it. And the third answer is yes, this is worth my time and energy, but. And that but might be something like, yes, this is worth my time and energy, but I have 5 minutes and I think this is a half-hour conversation. Yes, this is worth my time and energy, but I only got 3 hours of sleep last night and I don't know if I will be able to engage in the conversation in the way that I'd like to. Yes, this is worth my time and energy, but my mind is muddled and I'd like to get a little bit more clarity before I enter this conversation. Those are a little bit related to this second question. Do I have the mental, emotional, and physical capacity for this conversation? Again, is my mind muddled or does it feel clear? Have I just gotten into an argument with someone different from the one I'm about to get into a conversation with? And how would that impact my ability to be in a conversation in a connected way? Have I slept? Have I eaten? Have I drunk water today or recently? All of those things are going to affect our capacity to be in a conversation, and particularly they'll affect our capacity to be in a conversation that we find challenging. And the last question to discern whether we want to be in the conversation in the first place is it more important to be connected or to be right, to win the conversation? Another way to ask that is, do I want to dialogue or do I want to debate? The way that we engage with dialogue is very different from the way that we engage with debate. And if with those three questions, our answers are yes or yes, but and connected, then I actually am going to offer two other questions. Three, really, when we get to it. These two happen to be from Roxy Manning. They're from her work, How to Have Anti-Racist Conversations. And the first question is, why is this dialogue, why is this conversation important to me? Is it because the topic is really dear to me? Is it because the person that I want to have the conversation with is really important to me? Is it because both of those things are true? Why is this important to me? And what am I seeking? What do I want from the other person? And Roxy Manning offers 4 possibilities, 4 reasons we might want to have a conversation. The first is to establish a solution. We see that there's a problem and we want to address the problem. The second reason is we want to create shared understanding. And I'm going to list all of these reasons and then come back to them for a moment. Maybe we want to be heard. We just really want someone else to hear what we have to say. And maybe there's been harm done. Maybe we've done harm or someone has done harm to us, and we're really looking for healing. We're looking for reconnection. Now, with all of these 4 things listed, I want to say that that very often we jump to that first one. We want to solve the problem. We want to have a solution. And very often it helps us first to check to see if we have a shared understanding. We may or may not, but having that shared understanding, 1, builds understanding, obviously, and it also builds trust. We see that there are multiple perspectives at play, that there is a blue circle and a green triangle and a red square that are all part of the picture. And so once we have that shared understanding, that gives us a broader field from which to think about the solutions. If what we're wanting is to be heard, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, we want to think about the risks that we're willing to take, if the person is willing or unwilling to actually do that listening. And probably that most vulnerable conversation is the one for healing. And again, we're going to want that shared understanding and the opportunity for both people to be heard, or if it's multiple people, for all people to be heard, before we can come to that place of repair or possible repair. And we have all of these questions because when you're clear about what you're wanting from the other person, you can communicate it. Transparency is going to serve us. It's going to serve you, because if you can say to the person, this is what this is why I'm approaching you about this conversation. This is what I'm hoping will happen in the conversation. And this is what I'm hoping the outcome will be. That gives them a chance to decide if they want to be in the conversation. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And if they do want to be in the conversation, it helps them to do some preparation themselves. Generally, transparency is going to serve us, and that can be around all of these things. And it doesn't mean that if we've said, this is why I'd like to have the conversation, this is what I'm hoping for, and this is what I hope the outcome is, that is something that might change depending on how the conversation goes. It doesn't have to be static. And finally, I invite you to ask yourself this question. And this can be when you're going into a conversation or when you're going into any other situation. What is the energy I want to bring into this conversation? Or how do I hope to be in the conversation? I started asking myself this question, particularly in 2020 when I was out on the streets during the racial justice uprisings. What is the energy that I want to bring into this space? Because there are hundreds of other energies coming into this space. How do I want to show up? Do I want to show up as a grounded present? Does it feel important to express my anger? There are times when, and if I am expressing my anger, hopefully that will come from a grounded place. Do I hope to show up really calm? What feels important in the way that I want to show up in this conversation? And at this point, I am going to pause because I've just said a lot of words, and I'm going to ask you a question and invite you just to put your answers in the chat. And the question is simple. What is percolating for you at this point in the presentation, if anything? What did you hear? What piques your interest? What are you not sure about? What's percolating for you? And so I invite you just to put a word, a phrase, a sentence in the chat. How do I stay calm? How to create relationship? Yeah, definitely a reason that people engage in conversations is to influence the other person's opinion. Yeah. And we could think about that as that shared understanding, maybe a little imbalanced in that shared understanding or being heard. If what I'm trying to do is influence another person, it might be because I really want to be heard. I want them to hear me. And I'm not going to be able to read all of these because they're coming in fast. Thank you. I love it. Transparency will serve me. How hard it is to be prepared. Take some prep, self-awareness. Yes. With people I love, touch into that loving and caring. Yeah, not sure I have the energy to engage. It's important to know that, especially if it's in a relationship of trust, hopefully, and that person will be able to hear that. I do want to engage in this, and I don't know that I will be in it the way that I want to be in it. Being calm is important. And I want to just tweak that a little bit because I think there's a difference between being calm and being grounded. For me, anyway, grounded means that I am really centered and feel secure, calm, feels or can feel more peaceful than grounded. Calm is also grounded, but we can be grounded and still express things that might not look calm. Considering the energy I want to bring, thank you, thank you. I'm not going to read all of these, but wow, thank you for all of these anxiety about mismatched intentions. Yeah, want to learn more in practice. And it is a practice. This is why I say that to you. This is what I say to myself. It is a practice. Thank you. And so I'm going to continue. One of the things that I just want to name, and just to say that a lot of what I'm talking about are kind of the structures. There will be a little bit about particular words we might use in the conversation, but a lot of it is about the structure around a conversation, before, after, and a little bit of during. And so one of the things that we may or may not be thinking about is power dynamics in conversations, because we are working within structures and systems that don't value all people equally. And even when we are trying to create an atmosphere that challenges those structures, the structures and the imbalances are at play. And if you can see me on camera, Patty Petunia, my cat, has just decided to join us. She, I guess, is really interested in power dynamics. And so things that might be at play that might influence kind of where the power is in the conversation are things like gender identity, race, class, age, nationality, first language or language proficiency, education level, sexual orientation, religion, and there are other things as well. And I name this because particularly if you are accustomed to having more power, to having that systemic power, you may not be aware of how power and privilege are even affecting the capacity and willingness of the other person to participate, right? You've checked in with your capacity. We also want to be thinking about the other person's capacity to participate or not participate in the conversation. Because if we are used to having more systemic power, it is less risky for us to speak and to speak our mind and be honest. If we are in the power down position in this particular conversation or in general, it is riskier. It is more costly for someone in a marginalized group or with less systemic power to speak. And if we took that to the extreme, you know, it could and has actually gotten people killed. And so with that in mind, I invite us to think about support. Whether there is a balance in power or an imbalance in power, we can think about what is the structure that I want to put around this challenging conversation so that it can happen in a way that is connected, in a way that is grounded for both of us. And so if you think a conversation is going to take a lot of energy, consider what support you might need before, during, and or after the conversation. And really be intentional about planning for it and scheduling it for yourself. You are worthy of your own attention and care. And support can look a whole lot of different ways. It might look like writing. If you're someone who processes with writing, either to get clear or maybe just to get some things out of your system so that you don't say them in the conversation. Maybe you're someone who you can feel how energy moves in your body and it helps you to move to keep that energy going instead of getting stuck. I know sometimes when I have a lot of emotion in me, if I don't move, I actually end up with a headache. And so movement helps me to move that energy. Maybe taking some time to meditate or to pray. That's something that might happen with the other person, depending on what the context is. Maybe it's something that you would do beforehand by yourself, but really helping yourself to get centered and connected with yourself and with God, or that he, she who is greater than us. Maybe you're a person who processes out loud, and so talking to an empathetic friend before and or after the conversation will support you. Maybe role playing. I have done a lot of classes where I do role plays, and what I know is true, particularly if it's online, is that when we get to the role play part, a lot of people all of a sudden have things to do. It's really vulnerable to do a role play because even though some part of us knows we're in a role play, there are stories about we want to do it right in front of whoever we're role playing with. Also, our body feels the emotions, feels the sensations as if the situation were real. And that can be really uncomfortable. And that's whether we are in the role of ourselves or we're playing another part. Role playing can give us a lot of really, really good information if we're willing to enter into that vulnerability. Maybe it's about creating a mantra for yourself to help you stay grounded in the conversation, right? We talked about what's the energy, what's the intention that I want to bring in. And maybe you write down a word or a phrase and put it in your pocket, like grounded, like breathe, like I am peace, or I am open, something so that you have it could be a physical reminder. One of my teachers, Carl Plessner, would talk about when he was going into a difficult conversation, he would write kind of his feelings and needs. If we're talking about the NVC structure, he would write his feelings and needs down and he would put them in his pocket. And he said, if I had that really clearly and literally physically on my being, it helped me to be more open to the other person's perspective. And maybe if it's a really vulnerable conversation, having someone with you, a friend or a mediator, so that there is a witness or a presence or just someone else there during the conversation. And of course, these are supports that we hope would also be available to the other person or the other people. One of the things I have been talking a lot about really since COVID is consent and choice, because I think for a long time we relegated consent and choice to talking about sexual issues. And I think the more we can practice consent and choice, the better it will serve us to be in relationship and connection with one another. And so with that in mind, thinking about these conversations, you might be ready and willing. I'm all in for this conversation. And the other person might not be all in. And so if you also believe that consent and choice are important, then I would invite you to honor the consent and the choicefulness, both of yourself and the other person or the other people. And if the other person says no to the conversation, you might check in with them to see if there are conditions, right? If their willingness is high, but their capacity is low, then that can open some space for, okay, well, maybe now's not the time for the conversation. How can we prepare ourselves to have this conversation? If there is a power dynamic issue where you are in the power up, where you have more power, I think it's important to be really care-filled about checking in to see what conditions would help them to be in the conversation, because again, it's riskier for someone with less power to say no. And I've used these two words already. Sometimes a person has high willingness, but doesn't have capacity or has low capacity. Sometimes a person has a lot of capacity and they are not willing to engage. And so if their answer continues to be no, really allow yourself to mourn. And this could be a conversation or this could be a request that you made. I think in the culture that we live in, we aren't particularly skillful. We often don't give much time for mourning and allowing ourselves to just feel how much we really wanted to have the conversation, or we really wanted a particular thing to happen. Mourning, allowing that grief, helps us to stay soft, to come to some form of acceptance. And interestingly enough, very often acceptance actually helps us then to go into transformative work, or possibilities open in a way that might not otherwise open. Sometimes conversations aren't optional, which might also be something that brings up grief. And that's because the stakes of saying no may just be too high. In these situations, there are still ways to practice choice, to practice consent in these circumstances. And so some phrases that are very often connecting and can foster that conscious consent and that sense of choicefulness are things like, would you be willing to? It sounds like a mouthful, and this is something that I've picked up since I've been doing my own nonviolent communication practice, because I know that if I say, will you or would you, there might be an edge of the expected answer is yes. I know that with these words, would you be willing to? I am willing to receive an answer of no. It doesn't mean I'm going to like it or enjoy it, but I am willing to receive it. Are you open to is another way just really to open up that space. And I think this one is particularly important in when we're in a power up, or because of the culture that we live in. A lot of us have learned that it's not okay to say no to someone that we love, that it's going to hurt their feelings, and maybe it will hurt. And personally, I would rather have an honest and genuine no than a yes that is not honest and genuine. And I say that because I used to be the queen, I'll say it that way. I used to be the queen of the resentful yes. So I would say yes to something that wasn't really a yes, and then I would either be mad at myself or the other person because I had said yes to something that wasn't really a yes. And then I'd either not do the thing, or I would do the thing in a very grumpy way. And I don't really think that that is fair to anyone. And so really saying, and I do this especially when I'm working with young people, it's okay if your answer is no. It's okay if your answer is no. When we're making a suggestion, we can ask, how would that be for you? Here's my thought. How would that be for you? I really want to know your honest answer. And depending on the circumstances, can we try another time or a place or a way? And maybe I'll suggest another time or a place or a way. Or if that doesn't work for you, how might we do it to meet your needs, to meet my needs, or to meet the needs of all of us? And so again, with these kinds of phrases, with these questions, it helps keep the space open. If I'm asking them, I know that it's helping me to keep open, and it helps to cultivate choicefulness. It helps to cultivate trust and openness and possibility. And I also want to talk about withdrawing our consent. Maybe we are in the conversation and things are going really differently from the way that we had imagined. And so we notice that either our willingness and or our capacity is going way down. Just because we've said yes at the start doesn't mean that it has to be an all-time yes. And so there may be times when we choose to end the conversation completely. Maybe if what we're wanting is to be heard and the other person absolutely is not in a place where they can hear us in the way that we're longing for, we can say, okay, I am choosing now to step away from this conversation. Sometimes it's a matter of pausing the conversation and saying, okay, seems like we're at a point where we're stuck. maybe we can pause, take care of ourselves, and come back to the conversation at a time when both of us are ready again, or more ready than we were before or now. So a lot of this is about creating that clarity. And I also want to talk a little bit about calling in and calling out. Just as a reminder, in the framework that I'm offering, or these tools that I'm offering, the primary goal is connection, and our primary tools are curiosity, open-mindedness, and wonder, open-heartedness. And so to create that clarity, understanding during a conversation, one thing that we might do is to try and reflect back what you think the person is saying. And it might look like, well, I think I'm hearing you say this. Is this what you're trying to communicate? Is that what you're saying? That gives them an opportunity, one, to hear what you're hearing. And if what we reflect back isn't what they're trying to communicate, it gives the other person an opportunity to clarify what they're trying to say. And sometimes we may also want to really understand what the deeper meaning is, what the words are or the sentiments are beneath whatever message it is that they are conveying, whatever words that they're saying. And so we might say something like, wow, you know, it sounds like structure is really important to you. As I'm listening to you talk, wow, it sounds like you really, really value integrity. Wow, it sounds like you are longing for safety. And again, when we get to that deeper meaning, it is connecting. And even if we've made a guess that isn't what their experience is, again, it gives them an opportunity to say, well, no, it's not exactly that. This is actually what I'm getting at. And if we've touched something that they didn't even know was their experience, they'll feel it and we'll feel it. And very often what can happen when we've touched something deep is, at least for some of us, certainly for me, where emotion comes out my eyes, is it might bring tears, and it might bring this sense of relief in my body. There's a phrase that I like to quote. I heard it first saw it first on the free listening website, and it says something like, being heard is so close to being loved that most of us don't know the difference. And if we can offer that hearing, even beneath what the words are, it is deeply connecting. It is deeply affirming. And sometimes somebody says something that really doesn't sit well with us. Depending on what the circumstances are, we can call in the person. And when I say call in, essentially that is inviting them to reflect deeper. And sometimes a call out might be the action to take, because there is harm happening and we want to stop the harm. And so things that we might say if we're wanting to call someone in might be something like, I'm curious, what was your intention when you said that? What were you hoping to happen by saying that? Differentiating between impact and intent. How might the impact of your words be different from your intent? And we might need to name what the impact is. Wow, I really felt that in a particular way. I think your intention might be different, but I want you both to acknowledge that there's been an impact here. How might your comfort level or your assumptions or your expectations, your prior experiences, how might those things be influencing your beliefs, your decisions, your process? And of course, these are also things that we might offer, questions that we might offer ourselves, giving ourselves grace and that curious and wondering mind. What do you assume to be true about that situation or that person or this thing? And again, sometimes there are reasons that we would call out instead of the gentler calling in. Calling in is a gentler approach. And there are times when we want to stop harm from happening in the moment. And so we might say, I need you to stop right there. That does not work for me. Don't use that word around me. It hurts me when you refer to people that way. And there is, I don't know if you've heard of Loretta J. Ross, but she does a lot about calling in the call out culture, eliminating the cancel culture, etc. And she told a story, I can't remember the specifics, but a relative who used a particular derogatory term about a certain group of people. And she just said, I believe that you love me because, or I think it was a sibling, because we're siblings. And what you said hurts me. When you use that word, it hurts me. And so I want to ask you to stop using that word. And she said he never did. Again, who knows what he did outside of her presence, but within her presence, he stopped using whatever the derogatory term was. This also, if it's a derogatory term about someone else who is in the space, you naming that it doesn't work for you doesn't put the spotlight on the person who is probably being directly harmed in that circumstance. It's saying this doesn't work for me. And that way that person doesn't have to be kind of called into the particular dynamics. I don't think that's funny. Tell me why that's funny for you. And I need you to know how your comment just landed for me. And so again, the call outs, the purpose of the call out is to stop harm from happening in the moment. We might say, well, it sounds like you just said whatever. Is that really what you meant? Is race, gender, identity, religion, class, is that important? Is that relevant to the story? Because I'm actually wondering why you would mention it. Kind of thinking about unconscious bias that we or someone else might have. And it sounds like you're making some assumptions that we need to unpack a bit. All possible ways that we might call somebody out, words that we might use. I'm not usually one to do the gimmicks of, you're going to learn my number one strategy for difficult conversations. And yet what I'm about to say is the thing that I say the most every time I present about anything with communication. And so I think it's fair to actually call it my number one strategy during difficult conversations. And it's really, really simple. And it does not require words. And that is to breathe. What I love about this tool is that it is always available to us because we are breathing from the moment we're born until we die. And nobody's going to think it's weird if we take a breath. And taking that breath gives us a moment or a few moments to kind of check in with ourselves, to get even a little bit more clear, a little bit more grounded, and can help inform what does or doesn't come out of our mouth or what our next step is. Very often, slowing down is going to serve us. It's going to serve us. It's going to help us connect with ourselves and also help us connect with the other person and give them a chance also to slow down. Because when the emotions are high, very often we get amped up and we start to go faster. Breathing helps us, those conscious breaths help us to slow down. And again, I remind you that this is a practice, and these are opportunities to experiment. And depending on who you're having the conversation with, you could even, in full transparency, say, hey, I learned these things and I want to try them. Can we try them? It might help break the ice, and even bring a sense of playfulness to something that might feel challenging. And so I've just said a whole lot of stuff and put a whole lot out there. And so I want to ask you again, what is percolating for you? What's something that caught your attention, or that you want to think more about or remember? And I invite you to put it in the chat. And I'm going to stop screen sharing. This would be so helpful for teachers. If you know a school you want me to go to, send them to me. I was a classroom teacher for 14 years, and I didn't study nonviolent compassionate communication until after that. And there are things that I look back and I go, oh my gosh, I so wish I had known had these tools when I was in the classroom. Yeah, my mind is going toward confrontations. How do you have difficult conversations when there could be deep trauma involved? I know we're going to get to a Q&A, but just since I'm seeing that, I think that is where, particularly when there is deep trauma involved, having that structure of support becomes all the more important. So important, to create some safety. Pausing before speaking and listening, discernment about engaging, connection, practice calling in, need to practice being authentic, think before you speak. That's where that breath comes in. It gives us a moment, And grief. Again, there is one of my, who I would call one of my primary teachers, Mickey Kashtan, is the one who I really started. She actually, a number of the things that are in this presentation came from learning with her. And she uses a phrase, mourning the gap. And the way she describes that is recognizing that the way that the world or our country or maybe a relationship might be very different from the vision of the world or our country or relationship. And so giving ourselves some space to mourn the difference between those things can be cleansing. It can be helpful. It helps us to stay soft. If we believe that we want a world that has some softness in it, then mourning, while mourning may not feel soft, it helps us to stay soft. Power dynamics, breathing is always a good thing. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your comments. Calling in and calling out is a new idea. I'm so glad. Thank you. So I've been talking a lot. I might still be talking a little, but I'm going to quiet now and turn it over to Jack.
Well, thank you, Cory. That was wonderful. And yes, we will be talking with you in just a moment. So I'm just going to invite everybody who is with us tonight, if you would like to submit a question for Cory to consider in our Q&A session, please do that now. While you're doing that, I just want to mention that as we move into the, well, shall we call it the final countdown to the November elections, Just Faith has some programs that can shed light. Related to Cory's presentation, let me mention our Want to Talk program. We're talking about difficult subjects in a respectful way is really, as Cory mentioned, an art and a skill that needs to be learned and studied and practiced. So in this season of politics, when conversations can be ticklish at best, Want to Talk is a way to introduce some fresh ways of thinking about how to engage our friends, our neighbors, and even our adversaries in conversation. So here's the invitation. You've heard it before. Bring this program or one of our other programs to your church or community, because it's one thing for you to get educated, but bringing 8 to 12 people along with you makes the work 8 to 12 times more impactful, and maybe even 8 to 12 times more fun. You don't have to be an expert on any of these topics or have experience leading groups in order to be a facilitator. We will give you all the resources and training that you need. Next week, our directors of outreach and programs, that's Leela and Reverend Kristen Dollar, will be leading an information session about this program to help you get started and to answer all your questions. Leela's putting the links in the chat for more information. If you're considering bringing Just Faith programs to your community for the first time, we'd invite you to our introductory session entitled Tools for Transformation, which happens on August 22nd. Leela and I will provide an overview of all the important issues included in our different programs and help you consider how you might want to get started. Leela just also put a link to that in the chat. And finally, we're just a month away from our Impact celebration featuring keynote speaker Caitlin Curtis. I'll say more about that before we close. And then we'll resume our Acting for Justice webinar in October and continue to resource you with tools and strategies like the ones Cory shared this evening to help you navigate this unprecedented election season. Again, Leela's putting all these links in the chat. So now let me take a look at some of the questions that have come in and see what might go your way, Cory. Cory, let me just ask this question while the questions are still coming in. So we are in this election season, and the conversations tend not to be so much about, I'd like to share something of my heart with you, as much as I'd like to tell you why your politics are wrong. So is there a particular adaptation or any kind of nuance that you would add in the context of a political conversation about things you said tonight? Yeah. So I think you're on mute. Yeah.
I muted while you were talking. Thinking about the deeper meaning beneath somebody's, beneath what they're saying, I think can be particularly helpful. In a nonviolent, compassionate communication framework, there is a foundational belief that everything we say and do is because we are trying to meet a need. And so that means that when we make a statement, what we're doing is really, we're saying, this is important to me. And someone can say something that we find reprehensible, perhaps. And if we can open our mind enough to imagine this person is trying to communicate something that is important to them, the strategy that they are offering to meet that need, I find highly problematic. But if I can connect to the need, that might also open them up in a different way to what we're saying. You know, someone had made a comment about wanting to influence other people. One of the foundational principles of SURGE, Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is an organization for white folks wanting to do racial justice work, is mutual interest. If we can find what our mutual interest, what our mutual value is, again, that can help us to think more expansively about, okay, so you're proposing this. I cannot imagine doing that thing. And the value that's underneath whatever it is you're proposing is also really important to me. Let's think a little bit more about what might work. I mean, and it probably will be a little bit more heated than that. But again, focusing on the values, focusing on the needs can give us a connection point to stay in the conversation.
Oh, thank you. Cory, when you mentioned that you had been a school teacher and you sort of wish you had known some of what you spoke of then, I saw a lot of shaking heads on the screen as you said that. I'm wondering if something comes to mind that you would be willing to share that you think would be particularly potent in the classroom related to these tools and skills.
One of the comments that I saw was someone said is sometimes I imagine the person I'm talking to as a toddler, not in any sort of kind of belittling way, but just to remember that there might be a young part of that person coming up. And of course, toddlers often don't have ways to express their needs and may not have the words to it. And so just imagining that not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, we are beings that have all sorts of needs all the time. Some of us have needs that have gone unmet for decades, maybe a lifetime. And so if we can imagine, again, this person is expressing, this child or adult is expressing a need, can I connect with that need? It helps me, I think, to soften, if a kid or a person is kind of, this is what's happening in me as I'm interacting with them. If I can connect to that part of like, oh, this sweet person just has this need, it helps to soften me and helps the anger and frustration to go away. And for me to actually imagine, okay, how can I respond to this in a way that isn't from my anger and frustration?
Thank you. Cory, can I invite you to, there may be a lot of folks on the call tonight who would find a workshop or presentation by you helpful. Would you mind just sharing with folks how they can be in touch with you and the kinds of things that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is my name, CoryLockhart.com. And I've got the classes and things that are coming up on there. I actually don't have any that are on Zoom right now. They're in Louisville. And if you're in the Louisville area, I've got a workshop coming up on October 5th out at Mount St. Francis. But I do also offer workshops online, and so you can go to my website and sign up for my mailing list, or just kind of check back periodically. I do other kinds of work as well. I have a card deck of affirmations called Cards for Remembering that I use in my practice. They come from my practice of nonviolent compassionate communication and some other intuitive work. All of that you can find on my website. Thank you.
Thank you, Cory. Yeah, and now we're going to give all of you a chance to talk. We're going to break up into small groups for a few minutes, 10 minutes. And I'd just like you to consider the question, what did you find most compelling about tonight's presentation? Share whatever piece of it you found most interesting, most challenging, most compelling, whatever. And I just suggest when you get into your group, introduce yourself and just jump right in. As soon as I stop talking, Leela's going to send you an invitation to join a breakout room. So jump in, share a few words and some wisdom with each other, and we'll get back together in 10 minutes. Thanks. Good to have you back. And before I do another thing, I just have to invite us all into a silent applause for our speaker tonight, Cory. It was just lovely. So grateful for your time. It was so helpful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Before we do close tonight with prayer, I just want to highlight again our big event next month, the Just Faith Ministries 2024 Impact Celebration. As you may know, each year during the month of September, we pause to celebrate the impact of our collective work. And I mean our collective, everybody on the screen here together. Some of you on the screen are donors. Some of you on the screen are facilitators. Some of you are board members. Some of you are local organizers. Some of you are staff. And the work that we do together means that people have opportunities to learn, to be inspired, to be empowered to action, to form relationships and bonds that make the work of justice happen. So on Thursday, September 18th, we will gather to celebrate this life-giving work with an exceptional guest speaker, Caitlin Curtis. We will celebrate the presentation of the Mary and Gary Becker Social Justice Award, and we will also share some great stories. It should be a really fun gathering, so please join us. Leela has put the link into the chat, and we hope to see you there. So I think the last thing for us to do tonight is pray. And so I'll close our time together with this prayer from Vienna Cobb Anderson. Let us pray. We pray for the dreamers of this life, O God, for those persons who imagine new possibilities, who long for what others cannot perceive, who spin dreams of wonder and majesty in their minds. Defend them from ridicule and criticism, from self-doubt and the lack of faith in their own dreams, and from abandonment of this call to make things new. Grant that from their dreams may come forth blessings for humankind to enrich the quality of life and the wonderment of us all. Amen. Again, thanks for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next month. God bless and take care. Bye-bye.